What a wonderfully warm welcome. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. Get to see Dr. Lynch and Dr. Dove as well, who I've also got a very long-standing relationship with as well. I'm just happy to be here, happy to be back down south after a stint up north for a while. I'm never going back, so it's nice to be able to come over here and not have to worry about the snow. So let me start off tonight with what's my very favorite picture. This is a satellite photo of the Earth at night. And you know, when you look around the globe, what you see is that there's some places on the map that are bright and shining with prosperity and wealth. And then sadly, there's other places on the face of the globe that remain dark, dim, and impoverished. And what the field of economics has been about ever since its inception over 200 years ago is trying to figure out why. Why is it that some of these places on the face of the globe grow rich and others stay poor? What's the secret here? We've considered a lot of hypotheses, a lot of different ideas of what can explain these differences. Some people thought it was just resources. Maybe the countries that have resources buried beneath their soil, if you're lucky enough to have that stuff, you'll be rich. And if you don't have any resources, you'll be poor. But the nice thing about being a scientific discipline is what we do is collect data, look at the data, and ask, does it explain it? And the answer is resources don't seem to explain this phenomenon we see. We see countries like Hong Kong and Japan that are little more than volcanic islands out in the middle of the ocean. Hong Kong doesn't even have enough drinking water for its population. There's nothing buried beneath the soil. And yet those countries are as rich as the United States and more, even wealthier than some of the countries of Western Europe with their centuries of history. And then we see countries like Argentina and Venezuela that have abundant resources and they're middle income at best. Even when we look around the U.S. states, the same thing is true. We see states like West Virginia, the most resource-abundant state in the U.S., 49th or 50th every year in the ranking. What explains this? If it's not resources, what is it? Well, we've known the answer all along, actually. The father of economics, Adam Smith, all good economists have an Adam Smith tie. I'm sure you guys are sport nerds. All right, so Adam Smith, father of economics, 1776, publishes a book that everybody just calls The Wealth of Nations. But what's important is really its full title, Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. What he set out to ask in that book, or to answer, was this simple question: why are some places rich and others poor? And in that book, he concluded over 200 years ago that it really are the policies in your system of economic organization that matters way more than the resources you have, the education levels of your population. Those things, it's not that they don't matter, but nothing matters as much as getting the policies right. Now, economists actually have a ranking of the countries of the world and how good their policies are. Come up with a list of policies that we think are good for economic growth, and we go around and see which, for each country, do you have them, do you not have them? And the countries in blue are the ones that do pretty good with their policies, and the countries in red are the ones that do really poorly with their policies. And you can even see the resemblance just visually between the areas that were bright and the ones that were dark in the previous photo and the ones that are blue and red here. The point is that the countries that are poor on the face of the planet are poor because they follow stupid policies. And the countries that are rich get there because they adopt the right policies. Now, if I could teach everybody one thing about economics, this would be it. This is how an economist views the process that we call an economy. Every economy starts out with some inputs and resources to work with and tries to turn them into these economic outcomes we want, like new goods and services and jobs and all these things. But what's here in the middle is what I'm here to talk to you tonight about. The rules of the game that play in the economy, the institutions and the policies. And you can think about this process very similar to the process of baking delicious, yummy cakes and cookies. You start out with some ingredients, and you put them in the oven. This is the oven, and out comes the other end, you get your delicious, yummy cakes and cookies. And here's the important point. If the oven isn't working, you can keep shoveling the ingredients into the oven all day long, and nothing comes out. You can have the best ingredients in the world, but if your oven isn't working, you're not going to get much out of them. So the problem is most governments, federal, state governments around the globe and in the U.S., try to foster economic development by shoveling more ingredients in the oven when fundamentally it wasn't an ingredient problem. You think, the federal stimulus, we're just trying to spend money to get the economy going. Let's spend another couple trillion. Let's just keep spending when the problem isn't a spending problem. We have fabulous resources here. We've got tons of people here. It's not a spending or resources problem. It's an oven problem. And we've got the same thing going on in a lot of states across the country. In particular, West Virginia, where I was for a while, is a good example of this. The federal government undertook basically a federal stimulus project for the last 60 years called West Virginia. They dump more money into that state every year than any other state per capita. You know, brought there by Senator Byrd with the argument that it's the poorest state, and if we just spend more money there, it'll become rich. So let me show you a good example of what I'm talking about up in West Virginia. About 30 years ago, they undertook the most expensive road construction project in the nation in West Virginia. They took a 2-lane road that went across the state, and they wanted to turn it into a 4-lane divided highway. In Congress, the guys were there debating about this is so much money to spend on one road in one state. And the delegation of West Virginia was saying, look, how can you be against this? It's going to create a path of economic development across the poorest state in the nation. So 30 years ago, the road was funded. When I was up there, lived there, drove around giving speeches, I took these pictures on my cell phone, out of my front window of my car. Of course, the politicians put their name up on signs to let you know who brought you the road. But this is what it looks like driving down the road for 2 hours. That's the hood of my car, right? You're lucky if you see another car on this road. For a 2-hour stretch, there's only one gas station, right? So where's the path of economic development that they promised, right? It's like, build it, they will come. We built it, they didn't come. Right? The problem is there was no trucks on that road 30 years ago. There's no trucks on that road today. You don't solve it by putting the road there. The problem is West Virginia has one of the crappiest, if not the worst, business climates in the nation. What that means is businesses don't want to locate there. What you've got to do is, quit putting the cart before the horse, put the horse in front of the cart. You've got to get the business climate fixed so companies locate there. And when they start using the roads intensively and they're crowded, then you expand the roads. That's the way it works. And I kid you not, with the federal stimulus money, they were debating in the West Virginia legislature trying to make that into a 6-lane road to see if that would happen. But that's the mentality of government economic development, folks, right? Just spend more money and we'll fix these problems. But spending the money doesn't work if you don't have your policies right. Now, on the map that I showed you, the best example of what I'm talking about is the case of North and South Korea. And if you can't see the difference in the lights at night there, here's North Korea, here's South Korea. And it's not just the lights at night that'll tell you something's going on. The average person in South Korea is about as rich as the average person in America. Well, the average person in North Korea is about as rich as the average person in Africa. Now, the reason this is such a good comparison is fundamentally at the start of the day, they start out with the same set of ingredients to work with. They have the same climate, the same geography, the same access to ports and harbors. In fact, it goes deeper than that, because a lot of people think maybe cultural differences explain these. I mean, this used to be one country, like the U.S. Civil War split us in half for a while. North and South Korea were split in half arbitrarily. And the DNA of these people is the same. They have a common culture, a common history. Look at the difference in economic outcomes, even though the ingredients are the same. The difference is the policy. South Korea ranks among the top 25 most free market capitalist economies on the face of the planet. North Korea ranks near the dead bottom of the list. They have some of the worst policies on the globe. And that's the difference it makes. You want to take a guess at what that is? That's the palace, of course, where the rulers live. It's the only place that has prosperity in a country like that, right? All right, so now let me give you a quick tour of the world on that economic freedom map. But I want you to keep something in mind as you're going through these. A lot of people claim that the reason some places are poor is because they just don't have entrepreneurial people. You know, they say, okay, U.S., you guys are just lucky. You have a bunch of entrepreneurs there. Or the states that are rich, so they'll say, oh, all the entrepreneurs go there. You know, there's no entrepreneurs in South Carolina, Georgia, that's why you're poor, right? Now, ask yourself that as we take this tour of the world. Let's go back to the map. This is a bigger version of it, and revisit one of the worst countries in the world in terms of their policies. Very low in economic freedom in the world index, Zimbabwe in Africa. Got some of the worst policies, basically no property rights, can't really be an entrepreneur, all sorts of bad things going on there, military dictatorship. But this is what life is like for families in Zimbabwe. They don't really own the property. In fact, the minute the government finds out they're there, they'll bulldoze this village. These people have to be very mobile because they're going to be chased out of there because they don't actually own this property. Now, here's the one I want to talk about for a minute. All right, because people generally look at something like this and just feel horrible and but, you know, feel free to do that for a minute and get it over with, because here's what we need to talk about. People claim that people in these countries aren't entrepreneurial, aren't creative. Let me ask you a question. If tonight you were stuck out in the desert in Zimbabwe with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, could you, with your bare hands, make a hut for you to spend the night in tonight? I don't know about you, but if I was stuck out there tonight, I'd be going to that guy for some help. In fact, he'd probably take my babe, right? Because he's like, shoot, you can build a house for me, you can't. Like, this dude could probably go hunt and kill something with his bare hands, build this hut. How do you make that sand stick together? Do you have any idea? Make a roof out of brush that you're picking up around you? Well, you say this guy is an innovator, that he's a hard worker? No, he is. but he's stuck in an environment where he can't do much with it. And I'll give you some better examples of this as we move on. Let's visit Romania, a country in Eastern Europe that was mired in socialism under the Soviet bloc for years. These pictures were taken by a friend of mine when he visited Romania. This is what life is like today in Romania. Now, here's the story with this. He talked to the shop owner. In Romania, you need permission from the government for every single product line you want to carry. And if anybody else who carries the product wants to stop you, they can. So the problem with this lady, he went and interviewed her. She's only got permission from the government to carry one product line. She can't seem to get permission for any of the others. So she has this storefront. She can't get the. I mean, imagine if you ran a convenience store in America and had to lobby the Georgia legislature for every single product you want to carry in your store. How many products do you think are in the convenience store? Thousands, right? I mean, this poor lady, she's got customers wanting to come in and bare shelves. Now, most of the trucks in Romania are reserved for the military, so people have to make do with what they can. But here's the photo I want to talk about for a little bit. My favorite one of the whole presentation. Now, I've always thought there were two cows, but I swear after one of my presentations, somebody came up and said, dude, that's a third cow. I'm like, that can't be a third cow. There's no way. I don't care. It's either 2 or 3. You can make your own judgment call. But 2 should be impressive enough. Because I can't even get my dog in the back of my car. And I don't know how you go about getting 2 cows in the back of your car. But let me just say this. You want to claim that this guy isn't an out-of-the-box thinker? You want to claim that people there aren't innovative and entrepreneurial? All I got to say is you put this guy in America and he would invent the iPad. Who would think to do this with cows, right? Imagine what this guy could do if he lived in a country where he could buy a Ford F-150 and one of the horse trailers could cart the horses or the cows around it. He could create wealth, a lot of wealth, and employ people because he's a smart guy. But he's mired under horrible policies and horrible rules in a country that is very backward. They're starting to open up to multinationals there, but it's certainly not making much of a difference in Romania. Policies matter. Now, let's move up the ladder to some countries that score medium on the index. So they got about half their policies right. What does life look like when you get half the policies right instead of none of them right? Well, let's visit India. India is about the middle of the pack in the Freedom of the World Index. This is what life is like in India. It's starting to get a little bit better. Not as nice as it is here, but certainly a little bit better than Zimbabwe. Permanent structures, people doing productive things. Another country with medium freedom is the country right below us, right south of the border there, Mexico, about tied with India in the economic freedom of the world ranking. Life looks just like it does in India. A lot better than Zimbabwe, but not quite as good as ours. This is a typical school in Mexico. They have their plastic chairs made out of paper bowls and stuff, but it's a lot better than Zimbabwe. You move up the index, you start becoming more prosperous. Now, let me take you to some of the countries near the top of the list. And I want to start out with what's my favorite example, Hong Kong, that I referred to a while ago. Hong Kong is really a miracle that we should all learn from. Because Hong Kong today is as rich as the United States. But if you could get into a time machine, go back to the 1940s and 50s and visit Hong Kong, it would be as poor as Africa. Hong Kong was as poor as Africa 40 or 50 years ago. They have not a single resource buried under their ground. Volcanic island out in the middle of the ocean. And this is what they've done for themselves in a matter of 40 or 50 years. This is what Hong Kong is like today. This is their schools, look just like ours. None of this was there 20 years ago. This is a dirt poor community. Unbelievable the wealth they've created for themselves with nothing to work with. But they have the best policies on the face of the globe. Their economy only has one tax. One tax. You pay one flat income tax, that's it. There's not 800 taxes. They have no regulation. No regulations on trades, complete free trade. If you ever go on eBay and start buying stuff, you'll notice a lot of stuff gets shipped through Hong Kong. Why? Because you can import and export from Hong Kong free. There's no special taxes to keep out foreign competition. Their government budget is in surplus every year. They have no debt problems, stable currency, the rule of law. And it's magic what they've been able to create there. Another country with high freedom, of course, is the United States of America. Sadly, we're falling in this index. We used to be in the top 3. We're now below 10. We're in the 10 to 15 range. But we're still near the top, and things look pretty good here relative to the rest of the world, too, because we have good policies that promote entrepreneurship. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about, is why economic policies matter, is because of how they affect entrepreneurship. Decentralized entrepreneurship is the reason why good policies create wealth. Entrepreneurs just daily keep inventing new things that improve our way of life. Let me give you some examples. Let's look at how our homes have changed in a typical house in America for each of these periods. And it's not just that they're bigger. Let's talk about some of the features of them. Percent of homes with heating and air conditioning. You know, if you were to go back to your grandparents' day, only 6% of the homes in America had heating and air conditioning. It's virtually all of them today. Most people would stop with a statistic like that and move on, but let me not. Let me get you to really appreciate this. This is not some magic. This is a story of a guy named Willis Carrier. Willis Carrier was an immigrant, blue-collar worker in New York City. He worked at a printing factory. He worked daily just printing newspapers and publications at a printing factory in New York City. During the summer, the ink wouldn't stick to the paper, and his boss was always complaining because they'd have to reprint stuff. In his spare time at home, Willis Carrier tried to invent a way to cool his boss's facility so that they could print during the summer. And he did. He invented the air conditioner. Uneducated immigrant invents the air conditioner. This thing is massive, the size of this room basically to cool something, very expensive to build, but he invents it. And you know, people were very skeptical. It's cost a lot of money. What do we do with this thing? I don't know. So there was one city, I think it was Detroit, that experimented first with Carrier's air conditioner. A movie theater and a shopping mall bought to install. Very, very big expense for them. But they were thinking, you know, we can draw people in the middle of summer without guys coming to watch a movie to be air conditioned. So they did it. And the investments paid off. So more shopping malls, more movie theaters started to install air conditioning. And then what happens? Well, air conditioning starts catching on. Other people come in and start competing. Prices start falling. They start making the units smaller and smaller. So we end up with something like a window air conditioning unit that you can get for a couple $100. This is the story of Willis Carrier improving our life. What else about our houses? This is something that you guys probably don't know. My daughter has her own bathroom. She has no idea how lucky she is. But back in grandparents' day, almost three-fourths of the homes in America had one bathroom for the whole family to share. In fact, in Charleston, it's kind of funny because I've been looking around at places, and there's this one really good community. All this bar scene and everything's real cool, real close to it. And all the houses around there are 1950s houses. Every one of them just got one bathroom for the whole house. And that was the standard in 1950. Today, we all have our own bathrooms, but it's not just the number of bathrooms we have in our homes. Look at this. I love this picture. This is the history of the bathroom. And the reason I love it even better is I took a shower in that shower. When I was living back in West Virginia, I came out of college at Charleston, in Charleston, South Carolina, to give a speech. And they put you up, like here they put you up at the hotel. Well, there they have some old housing that they put you up in. So they put me up in this old house, and this was my bathroom that I had when I visited College Charleston. History of the bathtub, right? This is a clawfoot, well, not a clawfoot, but an old bathtub. It didn't used to have running water. See, the running water was brought in here after the bathroom was built. And that was great because you didn't have to haul water to the bathtub anymore. And then they added on the shower and the ring around it. And all I can say, I was scared to death I was going to fall out. I think you get wrapped in the curtain and so that's all I thought of the whole time. And you know, you're thinking, what do I grab onto? No, I'm not going to, I don't know. I just got out of there as quickly as I could. That's all I'm going to say. But this is what our bathrooms are like today. Like, look at that. I mean, you know, there's a big jacuzzi in the shower where you can watch your spouse take their shower naked. I mean, but you know, talking about entrepreneurs, you know who I think, we all know the story of people like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all these boring people. The most underappreciated entrepreneur of all time is Mr. Jacuzzi. I mean, think about how much benefits he brings to us during our whole life. But if you haven't done it yet, you're going to have a lot of fun in jacuzzis. Let me promise you, by the time you're my age, you'll be saying, Mr. Jacuzzi was better than Bill Gates. Okay? So anyway, so I didn't know his story either. So I'm teaching an entrepreneurship class, and I begged him to add a paper. I'm like, will somebody please do a paper on Mr. Jacuzzi so I can learn the story? So the student did it, thank goodness, and now I know the story of Mr. Jacuzzi. Unbelievable. Even better than Willis Carrier, right? So Mr. Jacuzzi is an Italian immigrant. He's a farmer. And this is back, in the early 1900s. He works in the farm. He has his wife. And their son has this debilitating leg condition where his son is in pain all day long in his leg. Takes baths to try to make it feel better. Look, Mr. Jacuzzi had the idea of taking an irrigation pump from his field, bringing it in and setting it in the bathtub with his son to try to create bubbles. I don't know where he got the idea, but I can tell you this. I know what his wife was saying when he was hauling that thing into the house. Honey, what are you doing that? That belongs out in the field. It's all dirty. You're going to kill our son. What are you doing? But he's like, no, leave me alone. And he puts it in there, and it helps his son. So then he goes around trying to figure out how to take one of these agricultural pumps and design it so it fits on the side of the bathtub and circulates the water. And it works. and it helps his son's leg condition a lot. So it starts being used for medical purposes to treat ailments in legs, right? And now Mr. Jacuzzi is the Jacuzzi brand that's still around today, owned by the family. Story of another uneducated immigrant who just had a crazy, stupid idea. You know, cars, yeah, that looks cool, but try to drive it from here to Savannah, right? It'd be like 8 days, right? You know, we have air conditioner, DVD players, all sorts of stuff. You know, our phones, how they've changed through time. You know what bothers me a lot? When you guys complain about how much these cost. You want to know why? Because you don't know how much these cost. That was about $5,000 back in the 80s, not adjusted for inflation. And it didn't do the internet and text your friend. And you'd be lucky to get service in the 3 biggest cities in America, like LA, New York, and Chicago. Right? The thing was the size of a brick, you know? Our phones, right? Our entertainment. This is a typical TV from the 60s. In fact, when I was a kid in the 70s, I had my parents' old hand-me-down TV. It looked just like that. 13 channels on the dial. The 2 you could get with gravity ears worked, you know. There was no cable back then. And here we've got virtual home movie theaters in our houses today. Or science. You know, with a kid, you end up getting subjected to all these old TV shows. And Nick at Night used to play the Brady Bunch over and over and over. And there was this one episode of the Brady Bunch my daughter was watching where Michael Brady's in his office and little Bobby, his youngest son, comes in and starts playing with Mr. Brady's calculator. It was back in the 70s. And Mr. Brady says, Bobby, don't touch that. It costs $300. I'm serious. Do you know that? This calculator would have cost $300 back in 1972. And all it did was add, subtract, multiply, divide. That's it. $300, 1970. At the checkout line at Walmart, you're getting a calculator for $1 today that is more computing power than we have on the face of the planet in the 70s for $1. Unbelievable, right? Our computers. This is a real ad that I dug up when I was moving. This is from 1989, and this is a Radio Shack computer, which means the same thing back then as today. It's not top of the line. Right, Tandy 5000, new for '89, $8,500. Monitor and mouse not included. Usually, economists have to adjust for inflation to impress you. I don't have to, but let me. $25,000. If you were alive in 1989 and wanted that computer, it would have cost you the equivalent of a car. Today, quit complaining about how much the MacBook Airs cost, please. They're about $1,000 and they, just do all this great stuff, right? This is the story of entrepreneurship, right? Video games. Let me tell you about the best video game ever invented. All right? See, we lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and my grandparents lived in Moberly, Missouri. I was the only child. We used to take this 4-day adventure halfway across the country, right, to go visit my grandparents. And I was stuck in the backseat of this car, and this is before handheld video games. It was so boring. They came out with the first handheld video game. Oh my God, it was so great. So for the whole 4 days, I'm playing this handheld video game on the way there. I thought things could never get better. Let me tell you about how great this game is. It's football. You're the bright blip, they're the dim blips. There's no passing, it's just running, and you can't run into them. So you gotta wait for one to move up 2, and then you go around him and go off the side of the screen, that's 10 yards, and you reappear back over here and you have to re-navigate. But if you run around 10 times, right, you make 100 yards, you score a touchdown. And then it simulates what the other guy does, makes up a score for him, and they'll kick him around. Well, we thought, man, they just can't get any better. This is the best thing ever invented, right? But then, when I was in high school, they came out with Atari football. So after high school, we used to be over at my house playing Atari football. We thought, how can it get any better? There's 2 plays, run and pass. It was just great. It was we just thought it can't get any better than this. And today, I still love video games. I'm playing Madden football. There's the reflections on their helmets, the stuff in the stands. It'll do whatever weather's going on in the stadium that day. It's got the announcers saying their names and stuff. Oh my God, unbelievable, right? It's really a story of going from Pong to Rock Band, right? Go back to Pong, the very first video game. It was just a tennis game, and the difficulty level adjusted how big your mallet was. So it would get really small or really big, depending on whether you're on the hard or easy setting. But you gotta understand, see, at the time, we didn't know there was gonna be Rock Band. This is all we ever knew. Do you see the smiles on their face? We really thought this was good. Yes, they recorded it at the time, right? But who could possibly foresee that we would end up inventing Rock Band? That's the first video game in video game history. It makes you want to grab a 6-pack of beer and go home party with your TV by yourself. You don't care if anybody's there. But let me tell you, and I've never been able to drop this in a speech before, Dr. Dove is one mean drummer. All right? And nobody I've ever played guitar with, drum with than Dr. Dove, man. All right. He did remember? It was that's so funny that came up. All right, let's get more serious. Away from Noah. All right, our medicine. Let's go somewhere serious. If you went to a doctor in 1900, that would have been his medical kit to work on you with. What was the main ingredient he had to work on you with? Yeah, and you want to take a guess at what this thing is? It's a bite strip for you to bite on while he's using that thing. Yes, medicine is expensive today. We can now look inside your brain with magnetic waves, dude. You want cheap medicine? Done. Plain again. This is the story of entrepreneurs who changed the way we live. But it's not just funny, right? If you look at the effect of this, U.S. life expectancy has gone up by 30 years in the last 100 years. In 100 years. I mean, you notice how long humans have been around? In the last 100 years, we've increased human life expectancy by 30 years. You live 30 more years of life today than you did 100 years ago. That's almost more than a 50% increase in your lifespan. Yes, it's expensive. But this is what entrepreneurs do for us. They keep inventing things that make our life better. Our music and how it's changed. The first things you could take in your car with the 8-track tapes. iPods. This is the percent of people in America who own all these things through time going back to 1900. Let's follow some of the early inventions, like the telephone is the red one. So this is the percent of people in America who had the telephone. I don't know if you know, but back in these days when it was first invented, it would have taken about a month's wages to make a coast-to-coast long-distance phone call. Only rich people could afford phones back in the early days. That's usually the way it is with this stuff. When it first comes out, it's very expensive. All right, so we get to about half of Americans owning phones by about 1945. If we look at the green one, this is electricity. So electricity caught on. We end up with about half of Americans having electricity in the 1920s. If you want to go to the opposite end, there's some things you may not realize are as new as they are. I mean, some of these, like the cell phone that you would know, and the computer. But what you may not know, for example, is that the microwave, which is this little colored one right here, is as new as it is. You kind of take for granted that we all have microwaves. When I was a kid, we didn't. We got our first microwave maybe in the early 80s or something. I mean, half the American population didn't have microwaves until about 1986. Microwaves are that new, right? And boy, the first ones really stuck, and they were really big and very expensive too. But other things that are relatively new are like clothes dryers that you dry your clothes with. Those were way after clothes washers, and in fact were considered a luxury. Half the population didn't have clothes dryers in their homes until about 1970. But all these things follow the same pattern. They're invented, they're very expensive, don't work real well, and then competition starts happening, they start becoming mass-produced, they become cheaper, and everybody ends up having them. That's the way it is with all these things, the telephone, the TV, the radio, the refrigerator. Right? There's a go for the refrigerator. Look how quick it caught on, but I mean, we're talking half the American population didn't have a refrigerator in World War II. Now, what the economy is about a continuous process of creative destruction, where new things come up displacing old things. All right? So we always have this dynamic process where new things come up and old things go by the wayside. Capitalism critically relies on entrepreneurship and the profit and loss system to direct this process. All right? So let me give you kind of an example to help you appreciate this. Because some people, I think, just think, oh, everything that can be invented has already been invented. So let me try to do it with a little story. When my daughter was about 6 months old, and for those of you who don't know 6-month-old babies or ever been around them, I don't care if you're Einstein, you're just a drooling baby at that point. So anyway, there was a 1-year-old baby birthday party down the street. My ex-wife got sick, she couldn't go, so I had to take my daughter to this 1-year-old baby birthday party. So I'm the only dad there. I walk in, I set my daughter down at these Fisher-Price toys. And there's one, it's got 4 holes, yellow, red, blue, and green, and 4 balls, yellow, red, blue, and green. And between sticking it around, my daughter puts all 4 in the right holes. And the mom's sitting across from me, her eyes got about that big, and she said, man, what the hell is that? I said, 1 to 24. And that's the problem with being an economist, is you know those formulas. You know, that's like 4 factorial. I could have done that in my sleep, right? And so, anyway, the point of it is this. If we only, the reason it's 1 in 24 is there's 24 possible ways to put 4 balls in 4 holes. Now let me take that somewhere else. If our economy only had 4 resources to work with, and you used all 4, you could make 24 possible new products. 24 ways to combine them. And if you're willing to use subsets like 3 or 2 or 1, you can have more than 24. Now let me push you a little bit further. You may have seen in the last year a mathematician give a lot of publicity on Yahoo News headlines because he's claiming that every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you end up with a new combination of cards that's never before existed in human history. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But go try 52 factorial on your computer. Your computer probably can't do it. It's a 68-digit number. Here's how believable that it is, and that's why it's such a powerful argument. He says, assume that every human that's ever lived did nothing but shuffle cards. Assume every human that's ever lived to be 100. Assume that we never slept. And assume that you could shuffle cards 1,000 times a second. So I'm asking you to assume that every human that's ever lived did nothing but shuffle cards 1,000 times a second, 24 hours a day, for 100 years. If you make those assumptions, we would have gone through about a third of the number of combinations in the deck of cards. With 52 resources to work with, there's almost a limitless number of new goods we can create. We have a lot more than 52 resources to work with. The point is, there's almost an unlimited number of new goods and services that could be created out there. And what do you want from an economic system? Here's what you want. You want crazy people who take rolls of the dice. What if I combine this with that? I don't know, that's how they speak. What do you mean put lights in shoes? Do you realize that would never work? What do you mean put lights in people's shoes? That's stupid. Now you look around, everybody's got little lights in the shoe thing, right? A new restaurant in Charleston is called Caviar and Bananas, just opened. Do Caviar and Bananas go together? I don't know. Pick from here, pick from there, put them together, we'll try. All right, what capitalism is about making it easy on crazy people to roll the dice. People with crazy, insane ideas, right? Roll the dice, keep rolling the dice, because there's so many combinations we'll never get through them. What we want to do is keep rolling to get through as many of them as we can, so we can stumble on the 1 in a million Apple, the 1 in a million Microsoft, the 1 in a million Google. And what we need is a system to give entrepreneurs quick feedback on whether they stumbled on a good idea or a bad idea. And that's what the profit and loss system is about. So I open up a business producing mud pies. You open up a business producing apple pies. People love your delicious, yummy apple pies. You're profitable, you grow and expand. People hate my mud pies, so I run a business freeing up that storefront for somebody else to roll the dice and have caviar and bananas. Try out his thing. And that's what capitalism is about. Making it easy on crazy people with crazy ideas to try them, and then give them quick feedback through the profit and loss system as to whether they've stumbled on something good. The key to understanding this, though, is it can't be centrally planned. And too many policymakers think that they can plan the direction of an economy. Oh, we need subsidies for this industry because that's the future. Really? Nobody knows the future. Let me give you some examples. Ken Olsen was chairman and founder of Digital Equipment Corporation. You wouldn't know who they are, but they were at the forefront of the computer industry right when it was first coming out. They were the ones who made cash registers and things like that. So it was very natural for them to be a first mover in the computer industry. So this guy in his day would have been the equivalent of like a Steve Jobs. Popular Mechanics magazine interviewed Ken. And then, remember, this is the guy at the forefront of the computer industries that are being invented. Popular Mechanics asked Ken, hey, what do you see about the future of your industry? Ken's quoted in Popular Mechanics saying, there's no reason anyone would ever want a computer in their home. How could it have been so long? I mean, have you ever known an entrepreneur say, now, people don't want my product? Usually entrepreneurs are the opposite, saying, yeah, everybody wants it. I mean, here's an entrepreneur who's selling computers and inventing computers saying, people at home will never be a market of mine. I mean, he couldn't even centrally plan the future of his industry. How could he have been so wrong? Well, the answer's pretty obvious. If you transport yourself back to 1977, computers are about the size of this room, and all they do is crunch numbers. Do you want one of those at your home? No, me neither. Who could have foreseen that that thing would turn into a little MacBook Air where you can check the weather, meet your potential spouse, learn how to build a bomb, view explicit pornography? I mean, there's no, Ken would have been like, no, I don't ever be able to do that. It just says zeros and ones, dude. Now, as a student, listen to this one. Don't hate me for this, but you'll appreciate it. All right, you may not know Fred Smith's story. Fred Smith founded FedEx. Fred Smith went to Yale, at college, right? So he was to Yale, and his capstone business course, he walks in. His professor is the nation's leading expert on business plan development. The kind of guy that governors fly out to do cluster analysis for their states and tell them their state's economic future. Fred Smith walks into his capstone business class, and the professor says your entire grade for the semester is based on one thing. You better come up with an idea for a business, write a business plan, and turn it in. Fred Smith goes back to his dorm room, comes up with the idea for FedEx, turns it in. To this day, when Fred Smith's giving speeches, he still holds up that tattered copy of that business plan and reads to his audience what his professor wrote in red ink on the business plan, which was, the concept's interesting and well-formed, but in order to earn better than a C, the idea must be feasible. Fred Smith got a C on the business plan for FedEx, second lowest grade in his class. And he was the only one to launch a business out of the whole class. And because he railed on him so much, CNN actually did an interview with his professor. And they were like, you're the first guy to see the business plans for FedEx. You really see, what were you thinking, you know? And the professor said, look, you've got to put yourself in my shoes. Here's this kid in my class who's never even held a job of his own in his life. No experience in business. His parents don't own a business. He has no experience in logistics. I mean, he's never even been in the logistics business. And he's saying he can solve a problem that our federal government can't solve. He's like, the U.S. Postal Service has been in operation for like 200 years. They have an office in every city in America, and they don't even have to run the profit. They're tax subsidized. They lose money all the time when we subsidize. And he's like, the post office with subsidies and that distribution network and the power of the federal government behind it can't figure out how to deliver packages across the country overnight. And here I've got an undergraduate student with zero business experience, zero logistics experience, saying he's going to be flying packages around in planes? What would you give it? C. That's why, if you have an idea and you believe in it, I don't care who tells you it's not going to work. You should pursue it. But that's what capitalism is about. Capitalism is about a system where you don't need permission of people to try things. If you've got a crazy idea, you can take it and go with it. And it's the profit or loss system and your consumers who tell you if it's going to be a viable idea, not a policymaker. Now let me ask you, do you think a state economic development office or you guys would have invested in this group of people if they came asking you for money? You recognize that guy right there? Bill Gates. That's Microsoft's first company photo. That's Steve Allen. He owns the Seattle Seahawks. Okay? The funny thing is you might have heard if you had invested early on with Microsoft, you'd be rich today. The answer is that's true. The irony is they went around begging people for money. They didn't raise nearly as much money. They had plenty of room for you to invest. You know, the funny thing is, you normally when a group of people like this comes around asking you to hand them your life savings and you give it to them, they go off and do drugs with it, you know? These people change the way we live. Crazy people with crazy ideas. That's the engine of growth. That's the engine that makes us live 30 years longer, is people who look like this. And like that. You know, that little nerdy guy you see around campus, he's going to change the way we live, you know? Just let him have some freedom. That's the point, right? Now, let's come back home a little bit. You know, because not only do the policies across countries differ, but across the U.S. states, there's variance of policies too. Not nearly as big as the variance across the U.S. But when we look across the U.S. states, there's this index that ranks the U.S. states and Canadian provinces in terms of how good their policies are promoting entrepreneurship and capitalism and free markets. Now, of course, I'm living next door in South Carolina. South Carolina is doing horrible. The sad part is we used to be in the top 10. We're now 43rd. And this is a good example because I give this speech to South Carolina a lot, so there's a lot of South Carolina data here. But let me tell you about a couple other states. Look at the poor states. Well, here's West Virginia. West Virginia is ranked 50th in the Economic Freedom of North America Index since its inception. It's a poor state. It's poor because it's got stupid policies, and we know the policies are stupid because we measure policies being stupid. Look at Mississippi, the one that West Virginia's always battling for 50th with. Second worst policies. Like, I'm serious. These are the worst three policies in it, right? And they're the poorest states. I mean, it's no. Now here's South Carolina's problem. Normally we're in the middle of the pack on all the business climate rankings, but we got two damn good neighbors. And the funny thing is, it didn't used to be that way. Like when I was growing up in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina were all just poor, backwoods, rural Mississippi kind of places. But guess what's happened in the last 25 years? Georgia and North Carolina got their act together. Both Georgia and North Carolina are now in the top 5 in the Economic Freedom of North America Index. You live in one of the top 5 states in this index, and so North Carolina. Do you know what's happened to Savannah versus Charleston's port? Do you guys have any idea of the stories of what's going on? Charleston used to be the biggest port in the Southeast, growing, thriving port. Now we're moving everything to Savannah. Savannah's now bigger than Charleston, gaining all these fat and locating there. We're having to compete with Savannah. They're now bigger than us. Places are moving to Savannah. And in South Carolina, they go, no way, don't leave. Right? Crazy, right? But we're competing against some of the best states in the nation right beside us, right? You guys included, right? But here's what happens when you're somebody like West Virginia or South Carolina. Here's what you do to yourself. Here's per capita income rankings. South Carolina, I don't know if you guys have been there. I grew up there. Charleston's wonderful, right at the coast. It's a beautiful city. It's got so much going for it. It's got all the damn ingredients right there. Ports, great climate, wonderful people, beautiful cities, metropolitan areas. And there's this poor, really? Give me a break, right? There's no reason South Carolina should be way down here. You in North Carolina used to be down here, and now you're moving up, and you're up here, and you're going to be up here next time I come to visit. And then when somebody else comes to visit, you're going to be way up here, because you got your policies right. South Carolina going that way. Right? Look where West Virginia is. Now, the reason that you end up down there is a pretty easy story. It's that you don't grow. Let me give you a good example. If you go back to 1988, here's South Carolina's per capita income. And here's the two states that were one above it and one below it in the rankings. So Oklahoma was just slightly richer than South Carolina. South Dakota was slightly poorer. So the average person, had you picked them out of these three states in 1988, would have been about equally as rich. Come back 20 years later. Per capita income. See, we started in the same place. But today, the average person in Oklahoma and South Dakota is about $5,000 richer than the average person in South Carolina. Now, this is per capita. $5,000 per capita means you take a family of three, we're talking about $15,000. Average income for a house, a three-family household, is $15,000 in household income. Higher now in these two states than it is in South Carolina, even though we started in the same place. Because our policies stink. And if you don't have good policies, you can't grow. And if you don't grow, you don't become rich. Because getting to be rich from being poor, from being Africa to being the U.S. doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of sustained growth over long periods of time. Small differences in rates of growth over long periods of time. And let me tell you, if you've got a deer population in your county growing at 1% versus 1.5%, you may not think that matters. It matters a lot over a long period of time. All right, here's the differences in the growth rates, just to show you. South Carolina grew over that 20-year period at 1.2%, while the other ones were able to get up around 2%. That's the difference it made. Right? So what are some of the policy reforms to promote entrepreneurship? These apply to all states, not just South Carolina, although I'm going to show you some data from South Carolina. First off, if you want to promote entrepreneurship and promote progress, you got to make it easier on people to open a business. Walking into a business in South Carolina or West Virginia looks like this. 13 permits for a convenience store. 13. They don't do open heart surgeries at this convenience store. It's just a friggin' convenience store. You need 13 permits to open it? You wonder where all the mom and pop convenience stores have gone? This is a Sam's Club, for Pete's sake. What could be more uniform in the U.S. than a Sam's Club? What could you possibly need to change or regulate about a Sam's Club? You know exactly what you're getting. But no, count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 different permits to open a Sam's Club in West Virginia. You wonder where all the mom and pops have gone. See, here's the problem. If this is your regulatory climate that you have in your state, you're disadvantaging a student coming out of, say, Mercer, who has never gotten an entrepreneurial experience, wants to start a small business. The only people who can deal with this are the big companies who have tax departments and legal staff and lawyers on staff to be able to navigate this. We're stifling the very small entrepreneurs that create our prosperity by doing this to people. I mean, all these are passed with good intentions, but the problem is good intentions aren't enough. Policies get passed all the time with good intentions that have disastrous consequences. Up in West Virginia, they were having a lot of cab accidents, and they thought it was because cab drivers were driving too long and being fatigued behind the wheel. So in their wisdom, the state legislature passes a law that limits the number of hours in a day that you can lease your cab. So cab drivers, if they're leased their cab, they don't own it. And they used to lease it for 24-hour windows of time. The legislature said you can only lease a cab for a 9-hour window of time, which is 8 hours to drive, half hour on either side, or pick up and return your cab. Stated intent of the regulation is to reduce cab accidents. You want to take a guess? We've got the data. Look at the day-to-day cab accidents by month. Put in a line for the date this thing passes. You want to take a guess what happens to cab accidents? Just put yourself in the shoes of a cab driver. You used to have your cab for 24 hours. You know, just great, ate with your family, went to your kid's soccer game, drove during the busy parts of the day. Now you get 8 hours to make your whole day's living. How do you behave different? No brakes, drive faster. The day this law is passed, accidents involving cabs in West Virginia go up. It was supposed to reduce them. They went up. I was up there talking about this for years. I'm like, look, it's clearly not living up to its stated objective. I'm talking to legislators. I'm like, why don't you guys get this rule off the books? And they're like, you understand, we got too many other things to deal with. There's the financial crisis and unfunded liabilities, and we got the state teachers here to go on strike. We don't have time to deal with the tax cab regulation. The problem with our state governments and our federal government, they keep knee-jerk reaction to something. We have a school shooting, what do we do? Regulate this, and then we'll move on. And they never go back and say, well, is what we did working? Is it actually making things better or worse? Can we not look at some data and see? I don't know, but people tend in politics not to be scientists, and it's very sad. And there is a lot of science on the relationship between guns and violence and all that stuff. In fact, there's a very convincing book out there that looks at crime rates and gun ownership. You want to know, what do you think the relationship is if you look at the communities in the U.S. with the highest rates of gun ownership? Do you think they have the highest or lowest crime rate? Lowest. Sure do. In fact, it's funny because right after September 11th, the economists in the group were saying, man, why are you doing all this stuff? Just let passengers start carrying guns on planes. What, you're going to hijack a plane when you know all those passengers are armed? You're crazy. Right? And it's funny because after the school shootings, people are like, well, let kids carry guns to school. And that sounds silly to you. Talk to our buddy Dash, who went to, where'd he go? Hampton City. They carry guns there. There are campuses in the U.S. where kids have guns in their dorm rooms. And they're some of the safest campuses in the States. I'm at one. Every cadet has a gun in their room. I live on a campus where every student is armed. You want to know how many shootings we have there? None. I'll park my car out there completely unlocked with GPS radar detector locked away. Nobody's coming on the campus to mess with anybody. Good luck coming into my classroom and taking it over, man. I got to be a Harvey, man. Anyway, but the problem is our regulatory code doesn't really look at things. They do knee-jerk reactions, try to do stuff, and there's no mechanism to get bad regulations off the books. And Dr. Dove and I have actually done some research on this, looking across the 50 states, saying which states have the best regulatory codes and what works, what doesn't. Turns out the things that really matter are sunset provisions. You don't know if you know what that is, but it's when you pass a law and you write in the bill that this law goes out of effect automatically unless it's renewed. In other words, it sunsets on its own. Right, actually, a whole debate about the tax stuff was that those tax cuts were getting ready to sunset, right? So they were trying to renew them, was what was going on. All right, anyway. Sunset provisions built into regulations mean the regulation has to fight to stay on the books rather than the opposite, fight to get off the book. So you'd have to fight to keep the regulation on the books by proving it's working. Those tend to be effective. And also, to some degree, cost-benefit analysis tends to be helpful, although not nearly as much as sunset provisions. Number two thing you could do to help entrepreneurship is make it easier for businesses to be profitable by lowering the cost of doing business. One of the biggest costs is capital investments. If you're an entrepreneur, one of the most expensive things you have to do is buy equipment and machinery. I don't care who you are. If you're a restaurant, you've got to buy ovens and stoves and refrigeration devices. You know, you've got to have all sorts of capital equipment, right? This is in the timber industry called a feller butcher. It's an alternative to a logger using a chainsaw. It's got tank treads on it. It's a round saw blade. Those are arms. The logger rides in the air-conditioned cab, and it goes up and it hugs a tree, and as it does, it severs it, and you can grab 4 or 5 at a time, lay them down in a nice and neat pile. With one of these things, a logger can be about 5 times as productive per hour as it can with a chainsaw. And if you talk to the loggers, they love these things. They're easier to operate than a chainsaw. Because really, chainsawing down a tree is not as easy as you think. It's not just, because then it falls randomly. You got to do the V-shaped cut. You got to make sure it's falling a certain direction. It doesn't require any special license to operate this. It's just got two, anyway. So the loggers up in West Virginia are very much like they are on those South Park episodes where they sit outside Lowe's and kind of wait for somebody to come pick them up. But it is, because logging is very on and off there. It depends if it's raining or whatever. So people will go around and pick up loggers who gather in certain areas because they need them that day. You want to come work for my operation. Most of them are small mom and pop operations. And the loggers just pray every day to be picked up by somebody who's got a feller butcher that they can operate instead of a chainsaw. Because, see, not only are they 5 times as productive, you want to guess what they get paid? 5 times as much. We know in economics, that that's in economics, that productivity is what determines wages. The more productive you are, the higher wages you can earn because you produce more output, right? The key to increasing wages and prosperity is giving workers capital equipment. With capital equipment, people are more productive. A guy with a backhoe earns more than guys with shovels do because he can produce more. Capital investment is the key to increasing labor productivity. Here's the problem. This machine is not cheap. That one machine cost $1 million. Think about that. You run a business, you buy a machine for $1 million and one employee can use it on a daily basis. You've got to recoup that cost somehow. That's expensive enough to begin with, right? But here's the problem. In virtually every state in America, we levy horrible property taxes on capital investment. High tax on capital investment. Now, you know what a sales tax is. When you buy something, you pay the sales tax that day. Property taxes are different. Not only do you pay them the first year, but you have to keep paying them every year on the value of the equipment. So when you buy this thing, let's just come up with a hypothetical number, 10% tax for $1 million, you know $100,000 in property taxes the first year. then you guys probably know accounting. So by the second year it depreciates, it's worth say $900,000. Now you owe another 10, you owe $90,000 tax that year. Next year is another $80,000. Over the lifetime of this machine, in about half of American states, you pay more in taxes than you do for the machine. Almost doubles the cost of capital investment. What economists know is that when you do that to capital, you end up with less capital investment in your state, fewer machines and equipment. And second, people hold on to equipment older equipment longer because it's depreciated instead of buying a new one. So if you're a logging company owner, and you're sitting on your toilet in the morning reading your logger magazine, you see an ad for a new feller buncher that's much more productive than your 10-year-old one, but you think, man, if I buy this new one, the whole process starts all over again with $1 million and $100,000 a year property taxes. Anyway, so here's South Carolina's biggest impediment to growth right now. Of all the things I talk about in that state, look at this. This is, if you locate a manufacturing facility in the 3 states, here's how much you're going to pay a year. So let's actually work out the numbers here. So this is a firm with $25 million in assets. All right? So now let's think critically about that. If you have $25 million sitting in the bank and it's earning 10% interest, how much interest do you earn a year? You guys are mathematicians, how much? $2.5 billion, because you just moved the decimal over, right? Right? So $2.5 million is about a 10% rate of return on your investment here, right? Look how much annually this firm has to pay in South Carolina. That's property tax alone. Doesn't count any of their other tax, corporate income tax, payroll taxes, none of that other stuff. This is just the property taxes on their capital equipment. South Carolina includes light fixtures in their definition of capital equipment. So if you open a restaurant in South Charleston, South Carolina, you're paying property tax on your light fixtures, on your ovens, on anything there, on your chairs, on your tables, all that stuff is taxed at the highest rate in the nation. South Carolina is the highest rate in the nation. And see, here's what happens. So if you move your facility right across the border to Georgia, you're paying about half of what you do in South Carolina. Move it across the border to North Carolina, it's about a fourth. Now you can see why a big wholesale distribution facility is thinking about locating at the Savannah Port or Charleston Port. People will claim taxes don't matter. Really? You think $1.1 million a year in taxes doesn't matter to the company on a $25 million investment? That's a 5% differential in the rate of return on your investment. You kidding? It matters a lot. So because we have such horrible taxes there, what we do is we negotiate with these big companies that come in, like Boeing. We give them all these breaks to come there, BMW. You know, and we'll do crazy stuff like owning their property and leasing it back to them because they own property exempt from the property tax. They try to evade the taxes. Or the government's trying to evade the taxes to attract businesses. But here's the sad part. The only company in South Carolina who can negotiate a good business climate for themselves is Boeing and BMW. If you're a mom and pop restaurant, you think you can go to the governor's office and get those breaks? No. You're along the I-95 corridor trying to open a small business, run a hardware store? No. Great if you're a big company and get to the governor's office, not so great if you're a small entrepreneur. You guys have it going on, so we can get ours under control. You're a much better place to locate than we are. And that's horrible. Number 2 here is legal reform. You know, excessive lawsuits make it very expensive for a business to locate somewhere, because even if you win them, you have to bear the cost of going through the court process. So, you know, a lot of states, to try to lower the cost of doing business, can enact legal reforms, and I can talk more about those, but I'm going to skip over for a night because you guys are law students, so let's skip over that. Number 3, reduce the role of government picking winners and losers and playing favorites. All right, crony capitalism is a term that's been being used a lot, but it's basically when success in business is dependent on your connections to government rather than your market forces at work. So if, like, the banks that succeed are the ones who have political connections rather than the ones who are doing good in the marketplace. Let me tell you a story, since this is sponsored by BB&T, about BB&T. BB&T CEO John Allison, I've heard him speak a couple times. He's a former CEO now. He was chairman of BB&T through all this financial crisis stuff that went on. And it's a very sad story he tells. Let me tell you about his story. He says, when I was running BB&T Bank and all these companies started doing all these subprime loans, he said, I knew that was a horrible idea. He said, basically what was happening is there was all this pressure, right? They were under pressure, but it was called the Affordable Housing Act, right? They were under all this pressure to give loans to lower income people. There was all these claims back during the Clinton administration that all loans went to rich people, and so, you know, people in the bubble or with insecure jobs couldn't get home loans. The home ownership is a dream in America. So there was this pressure to expand all these loans. And John Allison said, I just didn't think it was a good idea. So BB&T never engaged in those loans. And he said, we had customers getting mad at us, saying, look, the bank down the street will give you, fine, go down there, and we don't think this, and we think if you take this out, you're gonna be in a boat if your house value ever falls. You won't be able to afford it. You'll be in over your head. We're not willing to make it. So BB&T intentionally didn't undertake any of those risky loans. He said, I was getting flack from my board of directors because they're saying, look, we're losing profits. You're leaving profits. Other banks are more profitable than we are right now because you're not doing this stuff. But John Allison said, look, guys, here's my plan. That's going to come back to bite all those guys in the ass. Here's what I want to do. I want to start saving money so we can buy out all those banks when they start failing. BB&T had a strategy. They had saved up billions of dollars to go in and buy out all those other banks once they collapsed. Okay, financial crisis hits, all the other banks start going under. BB&T is completely solvent. They haven't made any of those loans. John Allison's ready to go and start buying up when what's the government step in and do? Bail out every one of his competitors and send them a big check. What? That's a great idea, right? We've got stupid banks with stupid CEOs making stupid decisions, and we want to keep them in business. They should have gone under and should have been bought out by someone who could run that business better and make better decisions. And that's what profit and losses are about. It's about companies who aren't being run effectively. When a company goes out of business, it doesn't disappear. I mean, you guys might have heard recently, it's like, Twinkies and Hostess is going out of business. Well, right now, somebody's making a couple billion-dollar bid on the Twinkie brand. Dude, Twinkies are coming back, and they're going to come back run by somebody better than Otis. That's what happens in America. You can buy up stuff. When a company liquidates its assets, there's a building that's now for sale. If GM goes bankrupt, it doesn't mean there's no more GM. It means it's bought by somebody who runs it differently. My gosh, those companies are auto companies. Got all these bail. I mean, you and I could run an auto company better than these places. It's crazy. I'm driving around. It was about a year ago, and I pull up behind a Lincoln pickup truck. What's the market for those? How many people you know like drive pickups and want Lincoln? What? No wonder these guys are going damn bankrupt. Jesus Christ, where's your market? If you're an American car company, think about it, right? It's like you know what to produce. Our comparative advantage is Toyota wasn't making muscle cars in the 1960s and 70s. They can't retro come out with the Toyota whatever. We can come out with Ford Mustangs and Camaros, and everybody loves them damn Explorers. Cut your product line down to what people want, focus on, give people what they want, right? It's like darn what's funny is because everybody thinks Walmart's taking over the world. It's always been that way. Because my dad likes to remind me when he was a kid, everybody thought Montgomery Ward was taking over the world. I don't know if you know, Montgomery Ward was tops of the Fortune 500 for longer than Walmart has been. And before then, of course, it was Sears. And after Montgomery Ward, it was Kmart. When I was young, Kmart was taking over the world. Well, see, the funny thing is you guys think Walmart's taking over the world. Your kids one day are going to be laughing at you going, you thought Walmart was taking over? Because that's going to be used like Kmart now. Or Montgomery Ward. This is what capitalism is about, right? Things go by the wayside, get replaced by other things. Big things fail. Big things get replaced by new things. The problem is when the government starts getting in and picking winners and losers by bailing out some that need to go out of business, keeping them in place instead of allowing the market mechanism to work. And this is becoming a huge problem in America. Do you know that the highest priced office space in America is now where? For the first time in American history, the highest price per square foot for office space is in Washington, D.C. Why do you think that is? Well, when you're giving out billions of dollars all the time to companies, where do companies want to make sure they're represented? Where the money's being given out. So companies are now investing their time and talents in lobbying rather than producing, trying to get government favors. And that's what crony capitalism is. And it's a disaster because it's an appearance of capitalism in markets, but it's really companies held up by government favors. We've got an economist named William Baumol, you may hear more about because he probably win the Nobel Prize. He's got a theory of unproductive and productive entrepreneurship. The idea is that there's about the same amount of entrepreneurial people everywhere. The question is, in different societies, how they spend their time and talent. See, in Romania, the entrepreneurial people have to spend their time and talent putting cows in cars instead of inventing stuff. Right? In Zimbabwe, building those huts, right? But in America now, we're converted to where you got to spend your time and talents lobbying to try to get wealth rather than producing. But let me tell you a story that really highlights what we're talking about, because really this is a problem of societies ending up with too many lobbyists and lawyers and too few scientists and engineers. And the solution to the problem is quit giving out special favors to special people. In other whereas every policy should be broad-based. And let me give you a really good example. In West Virginia, there's about 4 or 5 pages of exemptions from the state sales tax. One of them's for Girl Scouts. You know how they got there? Well, let me tell you a story. All right, the Girl Scouts spent 3 days in the state capitol in West Virginia lobbying the state legislature for a Girl Scout cookie exemption in the sales tax. Now, you know, they did the same thing lobbyists do. They went around giving out free cookies to all the legislators and putting on smiles and dressing up in their uniforms and talking around the Girl Scout posters everywhere, saying yay for Girl Scout shirts everywhere. Sure enough, you know, I don't blame the legislators. I couldn't have said no to Girl Scouts either. But here's the thing that's so unfair, right? It's like when I lived up there, you know, the Boy Scouts came to my house selling wreaths at Christmas. I bought one, and guess what? I had to pay sales tax. So I'm giving a speech in Beckley, West Virginia, and I say that. After my speech, guess who comes up to me? He was in the audience, head of West Virginia Boy Scouts. He comes up to me and he says, I know, it's so unfair, right? The Girl Scouts, but don't worry, we're going to go to the state capitol next year and get ours. Now, let me tease 2 things out of that story. First off, when the Girl Scouts spend 3 days of their time and talent over at the state capitol, we give up 3 days of their time and talent doing something else, productive. What else did the Girl Scouts have been doing for 3 days when it created well? Helping them sell them damn cookies. Helping old ladies across the road, right? I don't learn how to build campfires. But instead, they're lobbyists for 3 days. Well, at least though in West Virginia, that's a future occupation that's actually profitable. Because there's not many private business opportunities for selling cookies. You need to lobby government there. But here's the second problem. Is not only do you draw resources towards the capital away from where they need to be productively, but you encourage all the groups to have to do it. See, now the Boy Scouts have to go spend time there. And then it's the Eagle Scouts. And then it's some other nonprofit group. The point is, if you do a broad-based policy, you eliminate this. Have they passed a policy up front that exempted all youth nonprofits at once, then you avoid the problem of each person having to lobby, each group having to spend their time and talents lobbying. Broad-based policies are much better than selective policies. Whenever you have broad-based policies, they're policies that apply to everybody. Same tax rates to everybody. Same level of whatever, everybody. You don't pick and choose and say, this industry gets this favor. That industry gets this favor. Unfortunately, that's what Latin America is, a situation where we tinker with all the things. One of what I think is a very cool paper that I read a long time ago, when I was down at Florida State in grad school, we had a course in constitutional analysis, looking at the design of the Constitution, and whether the rules that you put in play in the Constitution matter for economic growth. And there was this real cool paper we covered about the Confederate States of America during the U.S. Civil War. Because when they broke away, they could have written any constitution they wanted, start from scratch, pen and paper, right? Anything you want. Turned out they adopted the U.S. Constitution word for word, except they made 6 explicit changes. I mean, you're reading along the Constitution side by side. There's this book, that's side by side. Paragraph after paragraph, same. First major change is, we have a clause in the U.S. Constitution that says, Congress should be able to lay and collect duties, impose excises, you know, raise money, and it lists what we can do with it to provide for the common defense, blah, 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 and for the general welfare of the U.S. So there's this thing called the General Welfare Clause in the U.S. Constitution. The very first time our government tried to give out goodies to one industry without giving it to everybody, it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they said, no, that's okay, that's in the general welfare. So our General Welfare Clause has been interpreted to mean whatever the politicians want, instead of things really happen to be at everybody's welfare. So yes, a subsidy to a failing cylinder because they're very politically connected, that's our general welfare according to the way it's interpreted. But here's the thing that was already being abused way back then. One of the few changes the Confederate government made when they could start over is they added a line right past that said, no bounties shall be granted from the Treasury, nor any taxes imposed to foster any specific branch of industry. That one sentence added to the U.S. Constitution would change the way we live. There'd be no tariffs to protect one industry over others. There'd be no subsidies for the banking industry to help them. No subsidy. You would have to treat everybody the same. It would reduce the number of lobbyists and the amount of lobbying by magnitudes if we could get something like that done. Number 4, reduce government control and centralization. You can't hide the fact the economy sunk to 100%, private, public, right? When the government takes a larger share, there's less left for the private sector. Here's the government spending as a share of the economy in each of the 50 states. You look, there's some states like West Virginia and Mississippi, more than half the state spending is government spending. Here's South Carolina, 7th biggest government sector in the U.S. That's one reason we're poor. Now let me tell you about my favorite state. State that tops the Economic Freedom of North America Index, Delaware. Their government is half the size of the government of South Carolina. People might say, oh God, if you cut South Carolina's government in half, people be starving. How can Delaware make it only half as big a government as everybody else? I love Delaware. I went to visit Delaware. Here's why I love Delaware. They save money everywhere. You ever see a Delaware license plate? Sorry, I took that moving down the road. I finally saw one. I'm like, hold on, my phone's right there. Right, they don't even spell out the whole state name. This thing's half the size of other states' license plates. It's black and white. This saves them $10 million a year. Instead of having these pretty, colorful big ones, right? They save money everywhere. This is the little kind of stuff states can do to save money to free up resources for the private sector. It's a great example. All right? Anyway, thank you for your time. I know we're running a little bit over, so thank you very much.